Well, let's talk about populism. The assumption in the setup definitely seems to be that it's a bad thing. But John O'Sullivan's written differently, haven't you?
Yes, I mean, first of all, of course, the word is used, as the word fascism is used, to mean something I don't like. It covers so many different things at so many different times that it's very hard to attach a really clear meaning to it. I noticed, for example, that most people thought the last year's elections in which President Macron won as a centrist, that was treated by everybody as a defeat for populism. Well, certainly Marine Le Pen, his opponent, was a populist and was a defeat for her. But actually, if you looked at his campaign, he had launched a party which was an attack on what he called, what de Gaulle and he called the regime of the parties. It was a personalist party. It had his initials, En Marche, Emmanuel Macron. It was based on the idea that left and right no longer mattered. One should be free to pick different ideas from left and right and get rid of that kind of ideology. These are all populist themes, but no one thought he was a populist because he was presenting himself as a liberal. Well, in fact, the way populism is used now in public intellectual debate, it is seen to be the antonym of liberalism. You have liberalism, liberal democracy, and you have populism attacking it. Well, how true is that? I think those political scientists, and they include some liberals like the Dutch professor Cas Mudde and some French conservatives like Pierre Manon, and in fact throughout Europe and to some extent America, you can see a critique developing, which I think is a conservative critique, but it goes as follows. Populism is the democratic response to the fact that liberal elites have removed entire questions of importance from the political agenda. They make it impossible to talk about these things. Those things they've removed include, for instance, mass immigration. They include multiculturalism. They include the transfer of power from parliaments and congresses that are democratically elected to supranational organizations or to the courts or to bureaucracies which are not popularly elected or accountable, but which nonetheless exercise a lot of political power, and indeed, as Mudde and others argues, they exercise more and more power as power is removed from these bodies, removed to these bodies. And this has happened now for 20-odd years. The electorates have finally come round to realizing, particularly conservatives among them, but not only conservatives, as Bernie Sanders demonstrates, that they're being sold a bill of goods. Well, they're not being sold it; they're being presented with it and then taxed to pay for it.
Let's remember that populism strides both ideologies, so that you have populists like Erdogan, even with religious imagery, and a populist like Maduro. The commonality between them, and I think all populists, is that first and foremost, to genuflect to Russell Kirk, who is genuflecting to T.S. Eliot, is that they are enemies of the permanent things. So it is an ideology governed by passions, governed by feelings, governed by desires, not subordinated to a telos, to a truth, and that becomes very dangerous. I give you Harvey Weinstein as the embodiment of that on the cultural level. But the thing that ends up happening is what they want to do in the political realm is accrue more power. And that leaves, oddly enough, the people out of it.
One of the good aspects of populism is that it's always been attended by this idea of a healthy economy is one where you don't have massive concentrations of capital, and where you don't have your leadership class thinking that you can do things perpetually without limits. But you have a kind of widespread distribution of property. Right? They believe in small business, proprietorship, and these kinds of things. Right? They accept the kind of limits that human beings ordinarily have to deal with in life, and they'll recognize that there are a bunch of things in life that you're not going to have this constant, unlimited progress. Right, especially if you realize that there are people who are going to be victims of that progress, and there's a certain sympathy for those victims.
Yes. In a political system in which the ordinary people, the decent society in which the ordinary people actually do have an influence because they're the people who suffer from these things, this wouldn't continue. But it continues because the politics have been further and further removed from the people who go into the voting booth. And that's what we have to, in a sense, be concerned about. And in a sense, I'm not singing a paean of praise of democracy, but I am saying that in a good society, you wouldn't have elites being able to ride away pursuing hobby horses without their being restrained by the reactions of their fellow citizens.
So you were talking about the euro, and I think one of the things that drives a lot of this stuff is when you have bad finance going on. I mean, it was interesting to me that never during the last presidential campaign did either candidate talk about the national debt. Right? I mean, we have $21 trillion of debt, of federal debt. We have $70 trillion of consumer, corporate, and government debt in this country. The fiscal gap in this country is $200 trillion, which on a per capita basis is worse than Greece. And nobody's talking about it. Why? Because they don't want to admit that there are limits, right? There are limits to what they can spend, for example.
Well, they intend to add to the debt.
Well, that's what they will do, yeah.
Bill Buckley always talked about the patrimony, and I always think Barack Obama's campaign slogan, "We are the ones we have been waiting for," was the perfect encapsulation of sort of everything that's wrong, the mentality that's wrong. That's a bipartisan problem too, as you're saying, everyone contributes to it.
Yeah, and just quickly, I mean, that was for Kirk. One of the essential things he took from Edmund Burke, right, that society was an eternal contract among the generations, right, and that people who do not respect their ancestors will make no provision for their progeny. And that really is I mean, people aren't even thinking about what this is going to mean for the next generation.
That is right.
We've gone in, is it 1 or 2 generations from the erudition of firing line to the food fights of Sean Hannity. And this is appalling, and it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. So what we need to do, I hope you're going to ask at some point, what do we do about this? We need to go back to read Kirk. We need to, and form circles of people reading and discussing Buckley, and watch the old firing lines. Look at what it looks like to really disagree with someone, to really have a profound disagreement where you let the person finish what they're saying and then you respond to what they said, not who they are, not what they look like, not what somebody told you. That whole tradition of engagement, of respect, is being just ripped away from the culture, and I don't know that that's so easy to put back.
What conservatism used to stand for was the idea that power corrupts. I know you'll like this, right? Power corrupts. It's Lord Acton. And absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. and
I had to correctly Thatcher on that one. It's an unenviable task.
No, I would not want to do that. And so there was always this suspicion of power, and that one of the ways you handled power was by distributing it as much as you possibly could, the principles of federalism and so forth, and that you had a certain suspicion about people who were too ambitious. What happened to conservatism in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is it became obsessed with controlling power. Rather than being suspicious of power, it thought, no, we're going to grab the levers of power and we're going to use it to advance a particular agenda. And I think that is something that would have disturbed Dr. Kirk. This idea that a conservative political movement would evolve, that would become interested in exercising power, especially at the federal level, as much as it possibly could. His thinking was always, you mentioned redeeming the time, right? It's about the culture. I mean, the politics is always downstream from the culture. And if you know that the culture is sick and you know the economy is sick, and so you're not obligated to participate in that, right? You can turn off your Twitter accounts and you can log off of Facebook and you can turn off your TVs, right? You're not obligated. If the politics gets ugly and heated, you don't have to be part of that, right? I mean, you can stage your rebellion by being a good neighbor. And by participating in, Tocqueville says this in the 1830s, right? The strength of American life is associative. It's not political. It's people getting together in civil society and working on mutual projects and engaging in acts of mutual dependency with each other.
On the issue of virtue, Russell Kirk wrote a famous essay, "Can Virtue Be Taught?" And on going back to your question, Father Sirico, so what do we do about it? What do we do about all of this? Can we teach people virtue? How do we do that? Is it just by being good friends and neighbors? Is there a political action in that? What is the role in public life for virtue? And what do we do when we're looking around and all the people we're paying the most attention to seem to lack it?
Well, I think we have to tell more compelling stories. I think we need to tell the story of Western civilization in a more compelling way. We need to remind people. The metaphor that I have used is I lived in a house. It was 3 stories high, and right next to it was this huge tree that went up above the house. And I was sitting on the porch one day looking at this tree, and it was an odd phenomenon because part of the tree was blooming and part of the tree was dead. And I couldn't figure that out, being from Brooklyn. We had a tree in Brooklyn once.
Right.
But they got it. It's gone. And so we called the tree doctor. Who knew there was such a thing? Did you know there's things they have tree doctors in Michigan? Anyway, this guy came and...
Well, when you export your tree from Michigan and you have the one tree, you don't really need a doctor.
Well, he picked at the bark and he went down and knelt down and picked up some of the dead leaves and looked at the roots and stuff, and he came on the board. He said, "The tree is dead." I said, "How can it be dead? It's blossoming." He said, "Half of it's blossoming." He said, "It's an illusion. The sap is going through the tree, but it's not being produced anymore. It's just living off of the legacy of the past. So you have to cut this down because in a Michigan winter, it's going to come down on the house." And I often think of our society in that way, that a lot of people just assume this is the way it's always been. When Acton said that liberty is the delicate fruit of a mature civilization, he's encapsulating there this whole process that had to do with the roots, that had an anthropology at the base of it that saw man as both corporeal and transcendent, a creator of a God who gave to him a purpose in his life, and that the sanctity of the individual bred systems and institutions that protected the right of that person to his property, to his family, the importance of truth-telling and bearing true witness, and the whole Judeo-Christian thing that, again, as you say, sacramentalized the material world, that saw the structures in the material world as the occasion for redemption, the occasion where God breaks out of his creation. Not that he invades it, but that the creation itself, and that this order is worth preserving and passing on, and this whole notion of what then becomes Western civilization, the most magnificent experiment in human liberty the world has ever seen, producing this incredible prosperity and liberty. I think we need to tell those stories again. We need to, if they can't read Roots of American Order, what we need to do is produce the 140 pellets and throw it at them, or little YouTube videos that tell the story in a parabolic way. But we have to reclaim it. The source, the roots are the same. They just need to be revivified. They need to be nurtured again and represented once more.